Hello, this is TelecomTV. We're in the Netherlands, in The Hague, at the SDN NFV World Congress 2018. This is a panel discussion on NFV, the edge and the path to 5G, and I'm joined by four companions who we're going to discuss it with. Starting on my right with Mirko Voltolini, VP Technology and Architecture at Colt. Mirko, welcome. Next to him, Renu Navale, Senior Director, Network Industry Enabling Organisation in Network Platforms Group. That's a mouthful. At Intel Corporation. Renu, good to see you again. Thank you. On my left, Don Clark, the famous Don Clark, from Cable Labs. We could say no more. You shall speak in a moment. And on his left, Klaus Martiny, who is the chair of the ETSI ZSM ISG. Finally got there, that's a lot to do. Let's now ask a question and get this show on the road. Renu, let's start with you. We're looking at NFV, the edge and the path to 5G. First of all, can we define the edge and then explain why it's so important to CSPs?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Martin. Pleasure. So the way we define the edge is everything from the regional and local central offices to the wireless base stations access, as well as some of the on-premise equipment like SD-WAN, UCPE. So it's everything from what was originally the edge to the access of the network. I think the reason it's so important is with the advent of 5G, it's really important for the communication service providers to not only distribute their network functions to the edge, but also transform the edge so as to host additional services and applications that can be revenue generating opportunities for the comm service providers.
That is a very succinct summation, if I must say so. Brilliantly done. Does everybody agree with that? Does anybody have any different opinions?
I think I definitely agree there. I'd actually define the edge a number of different ways. For me, the edge is defined by parameters that are important for networking. For example, latency, bandwidth, geolocation of data. So it depends on your use case as to what might be the edge. As a cable industry representative, I would say that we probably have the best-in-class access network, where we have at least multiple gigabits to the end user ubiquitously. So I was listening to Matt Beale's keynote this morning, and Matt was pointing out that the ubiquity of, in fact, there's ubiquity of 1 gigabit to the customer is something that really drives compute. And Matt's looking at me, so we're probably messing up the panel here. Although it might be entertaining for some of the viewers. But so for me, the idea that you could have bandwidth per user of 1 gigabit from a location, that's the cable head end, right? And then if you aggregate that bandwidth towards the core, then you start to get into increasing costs of bandwidth towards the core. So if you have a very high bandwidth application, then you probably want to do something to reduce the data going into the core. So for me, the edge depends on the application, but in the cable industry, I would look at it as something like the head end.
Okay, thank you. Any other?
I think it's a relative question. If you look at it from the CSP perspective, but I think we need to look at it from the customer perspective as well. They see the edge as being the customer prem. The micro clouds we're now starting deploying at the edge. So there is a place for different applications. It can be the customer prem, it can be the network edge. It depends on what kind of application we're talking about, where that definition fits.
Okay, thank you.
I'd
Klaus.
like to add something from the ETSI point of view, for sure.
That's why we're here.
Well, I think ETSI has an own ISG about MEC computing for a while now. It means we are triggering discussion in the industry about mobile edge computing for a while now. I think ETSI is in a good position because we triggered also discussion about NFV in 2012. That's the basis for this event here. And taking that into consideration, I think in ETSI we are doing a good job in order to push all the initiatives across the industry, not only about mobile edge computing.
So we have an idea where the edge is, and it seems to be a movable feast, really, depending on which part of the technology you're involved in, which part of the industry, and so on. Well, I think what we're all agreed with, that in the end, it's the CSPs that matter in this, before it gets to the end user. So what opportunities does MEC create for CSPs? I don't know who'd like to answer that first.
I think that's one for Mirko, isn't it?
I can give it a go, definitely. So just back on the point of where does the edge reside. So the telco edge or MEC is a place where you can deploy different type of services. Today we're constrained by the current physical hardware that can deliver certain number of services. We can't flexibly add different capabilities. The opportunity here is the fact that you can flexibly enable different type of capabilities without relying on different physical infrastructure. So we can continue to expand the edge capabilities without physically replacing the hardware. The other opportunity is that if you look at it also from the network perspective, how we can scale out, so adding more capacity, how we can provide more resiliency. So the technologies allows us now to be able to provide an extra layer of resiliency thanks to the capability of moving workloads from one place to another.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else anything to add? Renu, do you want to add anything to that?
So I think the one thing that we should also consider is the fact that the edge, because of the growth of some of the regional data centers by the cloud service providers, is kind of opening up services and applications from that were once upon a time hosted primarily in the cloud. They're kind of moving to the regional data center, and again, depending on the latency requirements, a lot of things can be hosted there. So we have to look at hey, what are the different types of use cases that can be hosted at the different locations in the edge, and balance that with kind of the TCO requirements, security and privacy requirements, bandwidth constraints, all of that, and then open that up for more services and applications, even for the communication service providers.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think I'd like to talk a little bit about the trade-offs. The trade-offs for putting any kind of equipment at the edge are the further you go out towards the edge, the periphery of the network, the more expensive it gets, right? You've got limitations of real estate, powering, cooling, and then of course you've got the operational challenges of getting people to actually install equipment there, maintain equipment there, keep spares there. So all of those are things that are really quite significant for network operators, right? And that's one of the things that will differentiate those of us that are access providers, whether it be mobile or fixed, that you do have many geolocations, right? So you're talking about tens of thousands potentially. And that's a very significant thing to take into account. Particularly if you want to launch a service, for example, that relies on an edge presence. At what point are you confident to launch the service when you don't have full ubiquity, right? So geo-marketing is a problem, right? And that's always the problem. So we have this geographic spread. So that then tends to point you towards locating things more towards the core, and maybe launching services that might have some lower bar in terms of bandwidth or latency, but get you started because you have ubiquity. So I think those are the things that I would be concerned about in engineering any proposition that requires very deep presence at the edge.
It's a really good point, because that's why I think some of the central offices are getting re-architected or redesigned, to form kind of this next generation central office or NGCO. Because
I agree with that, but I like to add another topic to the discussion, what you mentioned before about operations aspect. I think if you have a single solution for mobile edge computing only, I think that is not the best way to moving forward. You need a complete new architecture, how we design the network, not only specified for mobile edge computing. And as you know, I am the chair of the ZSM ISG, which has the scope to drive automation in operation. And from that point of view, I think we need a complete, entire, holistic management concept, how we manage all these technologies, not only mobile edge computing. For sure, we have a lot of good opportunities to create new business streams, but there's also a dark side on this coin, which we consider how we're moving forward with the management of this activity.
Do you think it's feasible at all to devise an overarching strategy for managing automation across all parts like that?
It is a prerequisite for that. We have to do that. It will be not easy to achieve that. It will be a difficult task, but definitely without that, it has to come, definitely. That is, there's no question for me.
I think there is a step-by-step approach. If you try to conquer the whole, I want to automate across the board, it takes forever, and I think it's too complex. You have to start, and I think you need to accept the fact you may make some mistakes, and sometimes you have to go back and rework things. If you look at one example today, you have to deal with multiple virtual function managers. That's not ideal. A single generic virtual function manager will allow us to manage properly virtual functions across different technical and service domains. But if you wait for that to happen, it will be quite a long wait.
It's like the old adage, how do you eat an elephant? A bit at a time. Yes, but you've got such a huge amount to encapsulate in that. It's a big job, isn't it? Okay, let's move on. We've covered MEC. Let's talk about NFV for a change. How important is NFV to the deployment of MEC?
Well, I think it's a really good question, because I think Don and I are close to NFV as well, because we are both parts of the ISG more or less right from the beginning. Don definitely from the beginning. I think virtualization is a good technology also for mobile edge computing as well. I think it should be considered if you're deploying mobile edge computing. Without NFV, I think it will be difficult to implement mobile edge computing. But for me, is a must.
I think that what we tried to do with the NFV strategy, if there was one, right, the strategy was really about trying to get convergence of requirements to begin with. I mean, that was essential. Yes. In order for the vendors to hear the same story coming from all of their customers, the operators. But that required, as Mirko said, not taking too big a step. So NFV was deliberately bounded from the very beginning to the fundamentals, everything that's very close to the NFVI. So the virtualization layer and the Mano stack. And that really turned out to be an ideal bounding, because it's ideal for the edge. Because at the edge, you imagine that there isn't quite as much dynamism as there will be in the core, certainly. Because as you overbook the core, because you've now aggregated billions of end users at the core, but you may have tens or hundreds, hundreds or tens of, maybe 10,000 at the edge, let's say. Okay. Then of course you've got a much less and restricted scaling problem. But you've also got a resource limitation problem there, because there's no question that in a conventional head end, a central office, it was never designed for racks and racks of data center servers, right? So you're going to have this very difficult decision as to what is at the edge. I think Cord has done some useful work there. But frankly, for the cable industry, Cord in its current instantiation may not work. So we're looking at what we might put there that's based on the NFV fundamentals, but also have some very significant cloud attributes as well. And I wonder whether they are a converged edge, or whether it's some kind of edge that is somehow hybridized. Hybrid edge for NFV, in other words, the things that are very network-centric in terms of their characteristics, and then things which are very application-centric in their characteristics. And maybe those two things are not necessarily optimal to be combined in a single stack, but they certainly must run on the same physical infrastructure.
Renu.
And I think if you want to achieve what we want to achieve from the original vision of NFV, the kind of the automation of the network, the orchestration, the resiliency or the elasticity, everything from the core right up to the edge, then NFV is almost a prerequisite even for the edge. And going beyond that, if you want to deliver upon the promise of network slicing, and which is basically virtualized logical slices on top of the physical infrastructure, then again every node within the edge should also be virtualized. So think of it as almost like micro clouds within kind of a multi-cloud and then a hybrid cloud type of environment. You have to virtualize every node of the edge as well, to deliver upon different types of services within network slicing.
That's a good way to look at it. And Klaus, you've been a strong advocate for network slicing as part of your mobile hat that you wear.
Well, we have one work item about mobile slicing in our ISG, and I think one driver is in 5G is the slicing aspect, and in order to generate new business opportunities as well.
Didn't the idea of network slicing come from NGMN? Is that?
It comes from NGMN, yes. That is
And then I saw it reflected on the Docomo presentation, right? So they presented a very good view of network slicing with some use cases. For example, IoT is a very obvious use case. And I think, isn't it obvious to all of us that if you have a gigabit to the end customer, whether it's delivered by 5G or a fixed network, then the richness of applications is almost unbounded. So isn't it obvious that now that we have, I remember I've been an access guy for most of my career. I mean, NFV is a kind of relatively new thing for me. I've been in the industry a long time. Watching Colt, for example, deploy fibre in London and taking a pioneering role actually in deploying fibre in big metro areas. But we were trying to basically sweat the copper pair, right? So that was my job. And so we envisaged tens or maybe 100 megabits, and I really didn't think we would get to gigabit this quickly. But of course we're getting there because the richness of the devices and the experiences that people are demanding. You only have to look at what's happening in the video, right? So look at light field, for example. Light field displays, light field experiences are massive bandwidths, massive bandwidths. And if you look at augmented reality, which I think you guys have talked a lot about, then all of those things imply quite a lot of edge aggregation of bandwidth, edge caching. And then, for example, the edge is the first perimeter where security threats may arise. Either threats from DDoS attacks from multiple IoT devices through to phishing attempts coming in from customers. So I think there's a role there for security at the edge.
Yeah, you need to be able to, I think the two Mac and NFV go together. You won't be able to do a proper job without virtualization. And I think this goes beyond the mobile specific area. You have to be, if you want to implement properly network slicing end-to-end, you need to be able to do that somewhere also at the network edge and also within the core, because you need to support a slice end-to-end. As Don is saying, we're going to see traffic continuously increasing from the access, and at some point all this traffic needs to go into the core. Unless you want to spend 3 times the money you would spend, you need to be able to properly manage the capacity in the core, and things slicing and virtualization need to be present there as well.
I think Don mentioned also an aspect about security. Is that what you said? Yeah. But I think that's really important. I like to emphasize this here from a service provider point of view as one of the crucial topics which you have to talk about, how we can secure the data for the customers. And then that is really, really crucial and important, not to forget if you are deploying these nice ideas.
Yeah, most of the enterprises actually ask for it as data sovereignty. So any of the big enterprises that have a lot of data, they want to make sure that anything that they have at the edge is, is completely secure, private, and it's, assures them of their data sovereignty.
Certainly, privacy is going to only increase in importance. I think Europe has taken a lead on this with GDPR. The United States, where I currently reside, they're a little bit, less fixated on it, but they will become increasingly fixated on it. And customers themselves are actually saying, "Where is my data? Who's got my data?" And what kind of things are being done with data?
Well, they gave it all away and now they want it back.
Now they want it back, yeah, exactly. So I think that those are the things where...
That's the reality.
The idea that data never leaves the edge. For example, if we're having monitoring of all different kinds for security purposes and in our homes, then where is that imaging, where are those images going? If a service provider can assure you that image never leaves the premises, or at least the perimeter which is well defined, physically well defined, then that increases I don't know whether you can ever sell security as an attribute. That's one of the problems with security. You can't sell it, it's taken for granted.
It increases trust, presumably.
That's I think that's where telecommunications operators have an advantage, right? Because we're not fly by night. We're there for the long term. You may not love us, but there's a certain comfort. There's a certain comfort in the knowledge that Colt's been around for 30 years.
25.
26. Cable companies have been around for a long time. They're around a long time. If you want to go and find out where these companies are, you can physically go to their office, right?
Yes,
right?
You can.
In my city in Joplin, I know where Cable 1 is. Right? I'll go there. I don't know where the heck some of these other players are.
No, well, they're in the ether, aren't they?
So I think there is a latent advantage that we have as communication service providers in the trust area.
I think you're right. We've got one more question to ask, because we're coming towards the end of it. Very interesting discussion so far, but let's keep it going the same sort of way. We've looked at CSPs, look at MEC in that regard, we've looked at NFV. So have a look at the dreaded use cases now. Are there any genuine, real, solid, you can touch them, you can use them, use cases that we can point at today that will help justify the investment for CSP, the likes of Colt, the likes of Deutsche Telekom, the likes of Verizon, the whole lot of them? Where are the use cases? Are they there and are they real?
The one that I know that some of the cable companies are looking at is cloud gaming, because with the ability with your access to the end users or end customers, actually very interactive cloud gaming or online cloud gaming is actually easy to provide as a service to the end customers. And then also by working with our IoT side of the house within Intel, we're seeing a lot of use cases from industrial, retail, digital security, surveillance. All of those are actually real use cases where there's a need to have an edge or a Mac. In fact, they're looking at Mac as a platform to host some of these services or applications for industrial control or for retail. And we have a really good retail use case on a Mac platform that's actually deployed in a number of the retail stores that we have in the United States. So these are actual use cases that we've seen for the edge.
Well, I was going to say, Mirko, what do you see happening?
Low latency, I think, is going to drive lots of the use cases. I think, it's proximity and also amount of bandwidth combined. You can shape it in different ways along these dimensions, but those use cases will emerge. I think, as Renu mentioned, a number of sectors are coming up with those use cases.
Don, I'm sure you've got something to say.
I think there's too many to even talk about. Yeah. I think it's so exciting because we've got the bandwidth. I mean, that's what's exciting.
So long we're not talking about a killer application, I'm fine.
Yeah, but it is still the tip of the iceberg, right? Because with the amount of bandwidth, we're yet to discover, the other multitude of use cases without using the word killer app. We're yet to discover what's possible by having so much of bandwidth, low latency, the machine-to-machine communication, all of that at the edge.
I'd like to just allude back to what I said earlier on about what is going to drive the investment at the extreme edge. It's going to be ubiquity of coverage for the use case. And therein lies the problem, right? You've got a chicken and egg. If you don't know what the use case is, or if the use case is doubtful in terms of its business prospects, then you've got two choices. You can either wait, and in which case you're effectively blocking that innovation in the market because you're not investing in the connectivity, or you take a risk. And telecoms companies are traditionally not a very risk averse, right? So that's why I said about most likely the early use cases are at the regional data center edge rather than the extreme edge, and that means probably deeper fiber to the making sure that between the access edge and the regional data center edge you've got very good fiber capacity, so that you're effectively then not completely into the core, where you've now got petabytes of data per second. But in those regional data centers where you've got maybe sub 10 millisecond latency because you've got fiber and good capacity.
It's been a really good panel and thoroughly enjoyable. Some real nuggets in there. I'd just like to say thank you all very much. Klaus Martiny, Don Clark, Renu Navale and Mirko Voltolini, of course. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.